you frame much of this remarkable article based on all these interviews, 6 hours you spent talking with him just about foreign policy around the Middle East.
Yeah.
And to a large degree, his decision not to intervene in Syria,
Right.
going back to the announcement that he was drawing a red line.
A red line for us is we start seeing a whole bunch of chemical weapons moving around or being utilized. That would change my calculus.
If Assad used chemical weapons, the U.S. would do something, and then he turned around and didn't
Right.
do something. Do you come away from that understanding why he is so averse to the U.S. getting more involved in Syria?
To take one step back, I think he's drawn two conclusions about the Middle East. One is that it's not fixable by the United States. He's also come to the conclusion that it doesn't matter that much. Because we become mainly energy independent, this region just matters less and less. And what happened in that red line moment was the whole apparatus, the whole national security apparatus, was moving toward enforcement of that red line. And at the very last moment, he kind of threw up his hands and said, you know what, I don't want to do this. I think he believes that to be a hinge moment of his presidency.
The critical narrative of his foreign policy approach is that that's the great failure of,
Right.
of
Right.
President Obama
Right.
when it comes to dealing with
That moment, when he decided not to take unilateral action, to throw it to Congress and sort of put a pause on everything, that was a very proud moment for him.
I will seek authorization for the use of force from the American people's representatives in Congress.
The moment that a lot of people think was his weakest moment as president, he is recasting as his proudest moment, or the moment where he showed true leadership. He believed that, that if he had gone into Syria in 2013, the whole of his second term would have been eaten up, consumed by the Syrian civil war. And he looked at the situation in Iraq with George W. Bush as kind of a proof of that.
On the other hand, you have now the growth, metastasizing of ISIS in Syria. You have this horrendous humanitarian
Right.
crisis in Syria.
Right.
Doesn't that undermine what he believes?
Without endorsing this view, I would say that his view is that he is fighting ISIS because ISIS does represent, unlike the Assad regime in his mind, ISIS represents a direct national security threat to the United States because they kill American citizens. The refugee thing, I think, is the one that has sent them reeling a bit, especially because the European allies are begging the United States for more intervention. So the gamble that he's made is that not intervening in Syria has saved America from untold crises and terrible crises and loss of life. And there's a very good chance that he's correct. And in 10 years, we'll all say, wow, that was really clever of him to sort of stay back. There's a non-negligible chance, there's a reasonable chance also that he's made a terrible mistake and that by not intervening earlier, he has let this civil war metastasize and affect not only the Middle East, but even our European allies.
Connected to that is what you describe as his willingness to just basically upend the way America has approached its friends and enemies in the rest of the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, Iran. He's staked a lot on this Iran nuclear deal. He's prepared to stand up to the Saudis. Where does that come from?
He, like a lot of Americans, I think, looks at Saudi Arabia and says, wait a second, 15 of the 19 hijackers on 9/11 came from Saudi Arabia. There were no Iranians on those planes. And he looks at Saudi Arabia and its traditional export of extreme models of Islam to other parts of the world. And there's another central pillar of our foreign policy in the Middle East, which is that since 1979, Iran is our primary foe. And he just looks at it and says, wait, Iran, not great. I mean, there's this caricature that he has a romantic view of what Iran is going to become. I don't think that's necessarily true. But what he does look at is Saudi Arabia and sees it playing an unhelpful role in both the Middle East and in world Islam.